Hi everyone, this is Lori Montoya here from Santa Fe Realty Unlimited. Today I have Robert Hill from Vandyk Mortgage, and he's here today to talk to us about off-grid properties. So hi Robert, how are you doing today? And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Lori.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about off-grid properties because people have been contacting me lately wanting to build off-grid or buy properties that are already off-grid. And I know that sometimes it is difficult for them to get loans on these type of properties. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about it. Can you tell me why it is a little bit harder to get loans off of these type of off-grid properties?
Well, obviously you're off-grid and your utilities are going to be the challenge there. And normally with a normal loan and normal house, we say normal, but essentially somewhere in town, right? Those utilities are already, those boxes are already checked because the developers don't know what they need to do to meet those Fannie, Freddie, the conventional FHA, USDA guidelines, right? But when you're building off-grid, the assumption then is that those utilities either aren't there or there's a different system that isn't as familiar to those folks that are underwriting those loans. That's the challenge, right? It's mostly just the utilities. Now, the general guideline you can kind of go by is as long as it's got a backup, you're good to go, right? So talking about power, solar, right? As long as you got a battery or if it's attached to the grid, then you're good to go. As far as the water, the cistern, if you have a cistern, a water haul is typically your backup there, or perhaps maybe the water haul in and of itself, hauling in the water on a regular basis is the primary source, and then the cistern is your backup. So just as long as all your utilities that you got going on, septic, we didn't talk about septic, right?
Yeah.
As long as they're backed up, then you're typically eligible at that point. The general guideline from Fannie Mae is directly just that. It's just all utilities need to have a backup. Basically, it's kind of vague. It's a little bit of one of those gray areas, but it's that way, written that way for a reason because they do come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, makes sense. So how does a Vandyk Mortgage able to loan off of these properties where other banks can't?
So speaking specifically to Vandyk, right? Because I don't know other banks, we call them overlays, right? So say the best example is credit scores. Say conventional loans only require a 620 credit score, or FHA requires 580. Well, a bank or any other lender can say, well, yeah, maybe that's their guideline, but we're going to take it a step above and have a little bit less risk to selling it on the secondary market and all that fun stuff, and say 700 is our minimum credit score. Just throwing it out there. So we, before pre-pandemic, right, had no overlays, meaning we do direct to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all the government, FHA, USDA, VA loans, that we'd go direct to them. So there's no overlays in that sense. And we can do that direct Fannie Mae guideline. So we don't have to worry about, having our own underwriter saying, oh, we don't want to do that for this, out of the other reason. It's too much risk. It's all about risk management and mitigation on the lender side of things.
So you said earlier, pre-COVID, has that changed things now that COVID-19 is happening for you?
Right, yeah. So the only, I guess, guideline or rather overlay that we've added is just FHA, whereas 580 was the minimum credit score. As long as you can get an automated approval, we can still go down to 580, but you need to have certain requirements like months of reserves, compensating factors, certain lower DTI requirements as well, your debt to income.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's DTI, debt to income. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that was clarified to people that weren't familiar with that. Mm-hmm. So any advice for anybody that's wants to buy off-grid or build or buy an off-grid property that you may have?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the number one question we always get, is because it's sort of a new concept that means there's not as many existing houses out there that are off-grid. So you're going to want to build new, right? Then that's going to be the challenge to finding a construction lender to be able to fund the construction of the project and be willing to supplement that construction on those risks of those backups and all the things we just talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So that's going to be one challenge for sure. And advice, really my biggest pinpoint of advice would be whoever you're using to build is going to need to be as many lenders sort of loan certified as possible. So that means be VA certified, FHA, conventional. And the reason you want that is because years down the road, if you decide to sell, because everyone has to sell, everyone dies. That's one of those things, right? It happens.
Yep.
So at some point, it's going to need to be sold. That's why you want it built to those specs, because an FHA appraisal is different than a VA appraisal, which is different than a conventional appraisal, right? So once those things get appraised for those types of loans, or say the loan it got appraised for VA, but it came back and needed something to be changed, it's much harder to do like in route, right?
Yep.
After it's already built, as opposed to just building it that way to start. So definitely making sure that your builder is okay with those types of loans and being able to build to those specs.
That's great advice. That's great advice. One other last question I wanted to ask you is cistern systems. So a lot of these off-grid properties, especially in the Cerrillos, New Mexico area, are run off cistern systems. And just want to know how that, what you know about them and anything you can tell us about the cisterns.
Yeah, one thing we didn't cover outside of having those backups that we talked about, we talked about a water haul. You could always have a well, obviously, too, if you wanted to spend the extra coin on that. But having a cistern, any water for that matter, that's not attached to city water, you're going to need a water potability test. And that encompasses about 3 or 4 different types of tests, like nitrates, nitrites, and I believe I don't want to say fecal matter, but that's one of the tests, right?
Yeah.
And not just that, but the chain of title is what they call it, and that essentially means who takes the sample. So that we can't have the buyer take it, we can't have a seller, we can't have anyone who has any interest, conflict of interest even, into the transaction to take the sample. It has to be the third party that's going to do the test to go out and take the sample. So that's going to be something to be mindful as well, not just for the cistern, but for any type of off-grid water source type of stuff. Because that's one thing that always comes back, or at least somebody forgets that the chain of title needs to be dealt with, and then the buyer ends up taking the sample, then we have to get another sample. It's a whole mess. So avoid the mess, do it right the first time, get the right tests, have the right person do it.
That is wonderful advice. Really, Robert, thank you so much for coming out today and meeting with me via Zoom. If there's anything that I can do for you, let me know, and I look forward to doing more videos with you in the future.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye.